Hi everyone, welcome to Muntri Street. I think this is one of the most beautiful streets in the heritage part of Georgetown, and this is where I grew up, and it's where I've ended up about 60 years later. So I've gone one full circle, lived in Australia, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, and came back all the way to point zero. Now, Muntri Street, I think, is one of the most beautiful streets because the architecture is so intact in this street. There's hardly any new buildings, even though there were quite a few bombs that were dropped here during the Second World War. It was relatively minor damage was done to the building. So you'll see rows and rows of terraces, what we call the shop houses. But I think that is an incorrect term for it because they're much more middle-class terraces. The shop houses were the first generation of houses where the migrants, Chinese migrants, came in and they worked downstairs, conducted their businesses and lived upstairs. These were basically late 19th century, and they were much grander houses, and they were built and designed for residential living. It was never meant for doing business downstairs. And how do I know that? Because this house here at 81 belonged to my great-grandfather, who bought it around 1910, 1915, and he wasn't the first owner, he was the second owner. So these houses were built around 1890. So he renovated the house around 1915, 1920, and I think that 100 years later, the house has survived the two world wars and bombings around here, and it's still in very, very good condition. So Muntri Street was one of the earlier streets in Georgetown. This here was the first Penang Adventist Hospital. It was also where the first free hospital for the Chinese was developed, and it's called the Lam Wah Yi Hospital. So this street sometimes is called Lam Wah Yi Ke in Hokkien. So the Mews was built around 1890, and I think that it was very far-sighted for someone to have built a communal mews. So which meant that the spaces were rented out to the residents of the street. I think that this was only one of about 4 mews in existence in Georgetown, and I wasn't quite sure whether there were actually horse carriages. I looked at earlier photographs of Georgetown and I hardly saw any photographs. There were bullock carts, there were handheld carts, there were all sorts of different carts, but there were no horse carriages. So it wasn't until one of my friends, whose great-grandfather lived in the street as well, Michael Chia, who gave me a photograph of his great-grandfather in a horse carriage in Muntri Street. That was the only time when I was convinced about that it was actually a mews. Each of these cubicles was for a horse carriage, so I haven't even changed the shape. They were like wooden doors, and upstairs was for the attendants. So the attendants had their own quarters upstairs. So it was just like the whole thing was purpose-built. Interestingly enough, I came across some of the families who lived here, who came back to have a look at it, and they were telling me that sometimes each of these cubicles had up to 10 to 12 people living in them. Now, each cubicle is only about 80 to 90 square feet. How do you do that? So he said to me that they would take it in turns to sleep. So they would organize among themselves to work the day shift, and some would work the night shift. This urban jungle that I've created was where the later inhabitants built the makeshift kitchens and their own toilets out here. That's why you can see that the plants are growing out of control. They had natural fertilizer down the whole row here. It's so wonderful that, you know, when this green oasis was developed, we had amazing bird life coming back into the inner city. At the same time, getting rid of the bird's nest or the sparrow houses, which were destroying the houses along the street. There were a lot of houses breeding sparrows for bird's nest up to about 5 or 6 years ago. The staircase is still in its original position, and we've replaced it with new wood, etc., but it's still the central access to the upstairs. And I've created this walkway here. There were some original granite slabs here that I was told was brought in as ballast on the old junks that came in from China to stabilize the boats, and had to add on a few as well, but I just love the old patina, the patina of the granite slabs. Gives it a feel of like coming down an old cobblestone lane.